The night was heavy, pressing against the small windows of the house like a weight no child should ever feel. The dim light of a single bulb flickered above, casting long shadows across the cracked walls. On the floor, in a corner where the cold crept through the gaps in the wood, a little girl clutched her younger brother tightly. Her thin arms wrapped around him as if she could shield him from everything cruel that lived inside that house. Her cheeks were stained with tears, and her lips trembled as she whispered, "Please don't hurt us, please." Her sobs echoed softly, the kind of sound that should melt any heart. But in this house, it only fed the cruelty of the man standing over them. The stepfather towered above, his boots dragging against the floor, his hand heavy with anger. His eyes were void of mercy, his breath thick with alcohol. To him, the children were nothing but obstacles, reminders of a woman who no longer loved him, of a life that didn't belong to him. He raised his hand once more, the children shrinking, the girl begging with broken words, "Don't hurt us, please don't hurt us." Her brother buried his face in her chest, too young to understand fully, but old enough to know fear. The air inside the room grew colder, thicker, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the next act of violence. But then, something happened. A sound at the door. A knock. Not gentle, not hesitant, but firm, commanding. The kind of knock that did not belong to neighbors or beggars. The stepfather froze, his anger caught in his throat. The little girl lifted her tear-filled eyes, hope and fear colliding inside them. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a deep voice that shook the very air inside the room. "Open this door. Now." The stepfather cursed under his breath, staggering toward the entrance. He muttered to himself, trying to gather whatever false courage he thought he had. The children clung to each other, their hearts racing, not knowing who stood on the other side. The door slammed open, and in the doorway stood a man whose presence filled the entire house. His suit was dark, tailored, out of place in the broken environment of this home. His eyes burned, not with the dullness of cruelty, but with fire, with rage, with something powerful and dangerous. It was their father, not the man who had hurt them, not the man who had stolen their childhood, but the man whose blood ran through their veins. The man they thought was gone forever. The girl gasped, her body trembling with disbelief. Her brother's eyes widened as if seeing a ghost. And the stepfather, pale now, stepped back as the man crossed the threshold like a storm. "What have you done to them?" The father's voice thundered, echoing through every crack of the fragile house. His words were not questions. They were accusations, judgments already written. The stepfather stuttered, his arrogance crumbling like ash. I didn't." "Shut your mouth," the father roared, slamming the door shut behind him. His fists clenched, his chest heaving with fury. His presence was unbearable, like justice itself had stepped into the room. The girl's sobs turned into cries of relief. For the first time in so long, she felt protected, as if a shield had finally been placed between her and the darkness. Her little brother buried his face in her shoulder again, but this time not from fear, from hope. The father's eyes softened only when they met hers. He bent down, kneeling to her level, his hands shaking as he brushed a tear from her cheek. "I'm here now," he whispered, voice breaking. "No one will hurt you again." And behind his words, a promise lived, one that would set the stage for a battle greater than any of them could imagine. Because this was only the beginning. The house trembled with the storm of emotions that had just erupted. The stepfather's bravado had dissolved into a cowardly silence, his hands twitching nervously at his sides. The children clung together in the corner, their eyes darting between the man who had caused them pain and the one who had just burst in like a guardian out of the night. The father rose slowly from where he had knelt beside his daughter. His tall frame seemed even larger in the suffocating room. His presence filled every shadow, his voice carrying a weight that pressed on the air. "You thought no one would come," he said, his words sharp as blades. "You thought you could break them, silence them, make them believe they were alone." The stepfather's lips parted as if to reply, but nothing came out. He staggered backward, bumping into the table, a bottle of cheap liquor clattering to the floor. The sound cracked through the tension, but it did nothing to drown out the fury radiating from the father's eyes. The little girl could barely breathe. She had dreamed of this moment countless nights. Her real father walking through the door, saving her from the nightmare. But she had also feared it was nothing more than a fantasy, a fragile hope her heart had built to survive. Now, here he was, his hand outstretched, his eyes burning not just with anger, but with sorrow. He turned to her, his voice softening. "How long has this been happening?" She hesitated, glancing at the man in the corner. The stepfather's glare flashed with silent threats, the kind that had kept her quiet for so long. Her lips quivered, the words caught in her throat. The father noticed. His jaw tightened, his voice deepened. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. Tell me." The girl swallowed hard, and with a trembling voice, she whispered, "Every day. He shouts, he hits me." She stopped, the sobs breaking her words. The father closed his eyes, pain cutting through his anger. He had been absent for too long, lost in a world far away from theirs, thinking his children were safe. The realization that he had left them unprotected gnawed at him like a relentless wound. He stood tall again, facing the stepfather. "You will never touch them again." The stepfather sneered weakly, trying to gather scraps of courage. "They're not even yours anymore. You left. She's mine now." His voice was unsteady, betraying the fear he was trying so hard to mask. The father's steps shook the floor as he closed the distance. His hand gripped the collar of the man's shirt, yanking him close. Their faces were inches apart, and the father's voice was a low growl. "Mine? You think abuse makes them yours? You think fear replaces blood?" His eyes flared. "They are my children, and tonight, you answer to me." The stepfather struggled, but there was no strength left in him. He had built his power on the silence of children, on the absence of the man who now stood before him. And now, with every second, his false authority crumbled. The little boy peeked out from his sister's arms, watching as if the world had flipped upside down. His sister squeezed his hand, whispering, "It's over. He can't hurt us anymore." But the father knew this wasn't over. Removing the man from their lives was only the first step. The deeper wounds, the ones carved into their hearts, would take time to heal. He released the stepfather, who stumbled backward and fell against the wall. "Leave. Now." The man's eyes darted between the father and the children, but he saw no opening, no chance. He scrambled toward the door, muttering curses under his breath, but the fear in his movements betrayed him. With one final glare, he disappeared into the night, the door slamming behind him. The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. For the first time, the house was quiet, but not the quiet of fear, the quiet of a storm that had just passed. The little girl let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed into her father's arms. He held her tightly, his embrace trembling, his heart breaking at the fragility of her small body pressed against him. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I should have been here. I should never have left you with him." She sobbed, clinging to him as if afraid he might vanish again. "Don't go, please. Don't go." "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly, pulling her brother into the embrace as well. "From this moment on, you're safe. I swear it." The boy's small voice broke the silence. "Will he come back?" The father's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. "Not if I have anything to say about it." And though his words carried strength, a storm brewed inside him. This night had pulled him back into their lives, but it had also awakened something else, a battle he hadn't prepared for. Because men like the one who had just fled didn't give up so easily. And he knew, deep down, that the fight for his children had only just begun. The night stretched on, but none of them could sleep. The little girl lay curled against her father's chest, her brother nestled close, their fragile breaths uneven as if their bodies didn't yet believe the danger was gone. The room smelled of damp wood and broken promises, and though the stepfather had fled, his presence lingered like a poison in the air. The father stared at the ceiling, his hand stroking his daughter's hair. Every flicker of the dim bulb above seemed to whisper accusations at him. "Where were you? Why did you leave them here?" He had built a life elsewhere, chasing opportunities, trying to provide, but in doing so, he had left them defenseless. And this was the price. He closed his eyes, but behind them he saw only images, his daughter's tears, his son's trembling body, the bruises that spoke louder than any words. He wanted to believe that tonight had been the end, that by stepping through that door, he had broken the cycle. But deep down, he knew it wasn't enough. The girl stirred softly, her voice fragile. "Daddy." His chest tightened. It had been so long since she had called him that. He kissed her forehead gently. Yes, sweetheart. Why did you leave us? Her question was not angry, but raw, piercing straight into his soul. He inhaled slowly, steadying his voice. I thought you were safe. I thought I was doing the right thing by working, by trying to build something for us. I never imagined he would. His voice cracked, and he couldn't finish. The boy looked up at him, his small eyes glistening. He said you didn't care. He said you forgot us. Tears burned at the edges of his eyes. He pulled them closer, his voice breaking. Never. Not for a single day. You are my heart, both of you. And I will never let anyone make you doubt that again. The silence that followed was heavy but softer than before. For the first time in years, the children felt warmth in that cold house. But healing words alone wouldn't erase the scars carved by months, years of cruelty. By morning, the house seemed smaller, more fragile, as if daylight exposed every crack that had been hidden in the shadows. The father stood by the window, watching the street, waiting for a sign that the nightmare wasn't finished with them. He knew men like the stepfather. They didn't disappear easily. Anger and pride were dangerous companions, and he expected retaliation. The girl sat at the table, her small hands folded in front of her, staring at the empty plate. He walked over and placed bread, fruit, and a glass of milk before her. Simple things, but to her they looked like treasures. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in so long, she smiled faintly. He crouched beside her. You never have to beg for food again. Not while I'm here. She nodded, but her eyes drifted toward the door as if expecting it to burst open at any second. The fear lived in her still, coiled like a snake. Later that day, the father sat with both children and began to speak carefully. Listen to me. What happened here, it won't happen again. But we need to be strong. We need to face what he's done, so no one else can hurt you the way he did. The girl's eyes watered. Do we have to tell? He brushed her cheek. Yes, sweetheart. Silence gave him power. But your voice will take it away. And I'll be by your side, every step. The boy clutched his sister's arm. What if he comes back? The father's gaze hardened, steel flashing in his eyes. If he comes back, he won't find the same children he left crying in the corner. He'll find me, and I won't let him lay a finger on you again. That night, when the children finally drifted into restless sleep, the father sat alone in the kitchen. Papers were spread out before him. Documents he had pulled from his briefcase. Legal files he had once thought he would never need. He had resources, connections, and wealth. For too long, those things had been distant from his children, useless to them. Now, he would wield them like weapons. The stepfather had believed the children were weak, voiceless. But he had forgotten one truth. They weren't alone anymore. The father clenched his fists around the papers. Tomorrow, lawyers would be called. Authorities would hear the truth. And the man who had haunted this house would face the light he had always feared. As he stared at the flickering bulb, he whispered into the silence, "You will never suffer again. I swear it on my life." And though the house remained cracked, scarred by years of cruelty, within its broken walls a spark had been lit, one that no darkness could extinguish again. The following days passed with a fragile calm. The children clung to their father, their small hands never straying far from his. The house no longer echoed with shouts and blows, but the silence was uneasy, like the calm before a storm. Every creak of the wooden floor, every knock at the window made the little girl flinch. She tried to be brave for her brother, but the fear still lived inside her, etched into her bones. The father knew it, and it burned him to see it. He had promised safety, yet even his presence couldn't erase the scars of what had been done. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in blood-red tones, a sound shattered the fragile peace. The door rattled violently, fists pounding against it. The children froze, terror in their eyes. The father rose slowly, his jaw tightening. A voice slurred through the wood. You think you can steal them from me? You think you can just walk back into their lives? The stepfather. The girl whimpered, clutching her brother's arm. Daddy. The father placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his voice calm but firm. Stay here. Don't move. The pounding grew louder, the door trembling under the force. Then, with a final crash, it burst open, splinters flying across the floor. The stepfather stumbled in, rage twisting his face, his eyes bloodshot with fury and drink. They're mine, he screamed, his finger jabbing toward the children. You left them. You don't deserve them. The father stepped forward, placing himself between the intruder and his children. His voice thundered through the room. They are not yours. They never were. The stepfather lunged, his fists swinging wildly. But this time, the father was ready. He caught the man's arm midair, twisting it with a force that made him cry out. The children gasped, their eyes wide as the struggle unfolded before them. The father's voice was low, dangerous. Every bruise on their bodies, every tear they shed, I carry it now, and you will answer for it. The stepfather snarled, spitting curses, but his strength faltered against the weight of a man fueled by love and fury. The fight was short, brutal, and one-sided. The father's fist landed squarely, sending the man crashing to the ground, gasping for breath. For a moment, the house fell silent except for the children's sobs and the ragged breathing of the man on the floor. But then, in the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder, closer, like the sound of justice itself racing through the night. Blue and red lights flickered through the broken windows. The father stood tall, his chest heaving, as officers stormed inside. "There he is," the father said, pointing to the man crumpled on the ground. "This is the one who's been hurting them. He doesn't leave this house free tonight." The children clung together, tears streaming down their faces as the officers pulled the stepfather to his feet, shackling his hands. He shouted, struggled, but the fight had drained from him. The power he once wielded through fear was gone. The little girl's voice trembled, but she forced the words out. "That's him. He hurt us. Please, don't let him come back." The officer nodded solemnly. "He won't. Not again." As the man was dragged out into the night, the girl's knees buckled, and she collapsed against her father. He scooped her into his arms, his embrace fierce, unyielding. Her brother pressed against his side, both children clinging to him as if he were the only anchor left in their broken world. The sirens faded as the car disappeared into the night, taking the monster with it. For the first time, the house was quiet in a way that didn't hurt. The father looked down at his children, his voice breaking as he whispered, "It's over. He's gone. You're safe now, truly safe." But as he held them close, he knew the scars would not vanish overnight. Healing would be a long road. Yet for the first time, they wouldn't have to walk it alone. That night, as the children finally slept in peace, the father sat awake, watching them breathe. He had faced darkness and torn it out by its roots. But he also understood something deeper. The true battle was not just against the man who had harmed them, but against the shadows he had left behind in their hearts. And the father vowed, no matter how long it took, he would be there to chase those shadows away. The first morning without fear felt almost unreal. Sunlight spilled through the cracked window, chasing away the shadows that had haunted the little house for too long. For once, the silence was not heavy with dread. It was gentle, filled with the soft rhythm of two children breathing in peace. The father watched them as they stirred awake. The little girl blinked at the light, her eyes swollen from nights of tears, but her face carried something new, a trace of calm. Her brother rubbed his eyes, then pressed himself against her side, seeking the comfort that had kept them alive all this time. "Daddy, is it really over?" the girl asked, her voice fragile, still doubting the safety promised to her. The father crouched beside them, his hand brushing her hair gently. "Yes, sweetheart. He's gone, and he won't come back. Not ever again." Her lip trembled. "But what if he does? What if they let him go?" The father's jaw tightened. He had already spoken with the officers, already begun the process to ensure that the man who had tormented them would never return. But he also knew that fear lived longer than the monster itself. "Then I will still be here," he said firmly. "No matter what. You'll never face him alone again. That's my promise." The girl's eyes filled, but this time the tears weren't only from fear. They carried relief, trust. She reached forward and wrapped her small arms around his neck, whispering into his shoulder, "Don't leave us again, please." He held her tightly, his voice breaking. "Never. Not again. From now on, every step of your lives, you'll walk with me beside you." The boy tugged at his sleeve. "Can we go somewhere else? Somewhere without broken walls?" The father smiled faintly through the ache in his chest. "Yes, we'll leave this place behind. We'll build something new. A home that's safe. A home that feels like love, not fear." And so, within days, they packed what little they had. The children's worn clothes, a few toys, scraps of a childhood that had been stolen but not destroyed. The father promised them that none of it defined them anymore, that the future would not look like the past. When they stepped out of that house for the last time, the girl paused at the door. She looked back at the shadows, at the room where she had begged for mercy, where her voice had once been silenced. Then she straightened her small shoulders, took her father's hand, and whispered, "Goodbye." The boy followed, and together they walked into the sunlight. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the children began to heal. They ate without fear of punishment. They laughed, awkward at first, as if laughter were something forbidden, but then freely, joyfully. The girl learned to draw again, filling pages with colors instead of tears. Her brother played with toy cars, racing them across the polished floor of their new home, his giggles echoing against clean walls. But healing wasn't instant. There were nights when the girl woke screaming, her body trembling, the memories clawing at her mind. Each time, her father rushed to her side, holding her until the storm inside her passed. Each time, he whispered the same words, "You're safe. I'm here. No one will hurt you." And slowly, she began to believe him. One evening, as they sat together watching the sun dip into the horizon, the little girl leaned her head against his arm. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart. I prayed every night. I prayed someone would hear me. And you came back." His throat tightened. He kissed the top of her head, tears burning his eyes. "I should have come sooner. But I'm here now, and I will never leave again." She smiled faintly, her small hand wrapping around his. "I believe you." The boy chimed in, his voice soft but steady. "We're not afraid anymore. Because we have you." The father looked at them both, his heart swelling with a fierce love that words could never capture. For all the wealth he had gained, all the success the world had offered him, nothing compared to this moment. Sitting beside his children, knowing that love had survived where cruelty had tried to destroy it. That night, as the stars lit up the sky, the father whispered a vow into the quiet. "You were broken, but you are whole again. You were silenced, but your voices will echo louder than ever. You are my children, and together, we will rise from every shadow." The little girl smiled in her sleep, her brother's small hand tucked safely in hers. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't look frightening, it looked like hope. A new dawn had begun. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Christspire. Here we tell stories that remind us of the strength hidden in tears and the hope that rises after every storm. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts.